Can you talk for a sec?
Oh, I'm
there we
on
are.
the broadcast.
We're in the broadcast. Yeah, so we are here. We'll get started with the show in just a second. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining. I'm going to double check and make sure we are showing up on all the channels. But yeah, I tested earlier today, so we've got Restream. If everything goes well, we are streaming live to Twitter, to Facebook, and to YouTube. All the same.
That's awesome.
And
kudos to you. That's awesome,
dude. Yeah, it's on. Yep, there it is. It is live on Twitter right now. Look at that. It's like we're real streamers or something.
That's really cool. I know. It's like it's a legit show. What's the old joke? How can this be any club if they're admitting me as a member? We're a real show now. Wait, how
when did that happen? Oh my gosh, yeah. I did some prep tonight. This is the first time, but like I had to go dive in to figure out like, okay, what am I going to research here? And I watched a couple of really good YouTube videos to get myself ready for the show tonight. So I'm really stoked. You're going to kick it off though, because this was your idea and you've got such a huge passion for it. So, but we're live.
Oh yeah, like I think I might have a bit of a surprise.
Ooh.
For you.
Plot twist.
On
I like it.
Yeah. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Excellent. All right.
Because I think it's gonna be great.
All right. Let's get into it then.
Yeah, let's do it.
It didn't work. Why? You're there, but why aren't you there?
Or it's that blue paint that I just bought. That blue paint is doing wonders.
It does not like your camera for some reason tonight. I don't know what is happening. I promise Ryan is here, everybody. Ryan's here.
I am here.
He's the man behind the curtain. There you are.
There I am. I'm appearing now.
Now in Technicolor.
Oh, that's awesome.
Go. Okay, now you're back. Okay, I feel much better. Now you're here. Hey, everybody. How's it
going? Hey, everyone. It's great to be back. Great to see you, Jeff. Jeff, last week you said my lighting was really good. I think this week your lighting is solid. It looks really cool behind you.
You know what it is? So I was prepping for some videos next week that you're aware of. And while we were on yesterday, I had my track lighting on. And it was bright kind of yellowish color because that's kind of what the incandescent lights look like. And what was interesting is they were like, we kind of like that. I'm like, well, I usually have the lights turned off. Like, yeah, we like that yellow. I'm like, well, I can just turn the color of the hue lights to be sort of a gold or yellow color. Like, no, yeah, that totally works. Okay. So I like it. I've just left it this way. Shanna said that is spooky.
What's really funny is the our boss, Jeff and I's boss at work. Hey Rich, how you doing? But Jeff and I's boss at work, she actually sent a picture of how her studio setup is all
sorry. So that's my wife. Hi Shanna. Thanks for being here, babe. Oh, you can see my comments. Yes, we can. And we can throw them up on the screen at any time. That's a thing we can do. Sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say that she shared kind of a picture of like how her office studio is. And I almost feel, so there's this really great Twitter account. And of course, I can't remember the @ right now for it, but it's basically like rate my office. And it's this Twitter account that just rates like your at-home studio. And I feel, Jeff, that I got to nominate you because you've got like the best setup of anybody that I know. I know I've said this on previous shows, but it looks great. It looks really, really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My wife could tell you that I got distracted by a comment. Sorry. That I built the shed originally. So anybody who hasn't watched the show before doesn't know. I'm in a shed in my backyard. It's an 8x10 shed. And beginning of the pandemic, before the pandemic, really, when we bought this house, we were having our yard landscaped and we had the plans done. And I was like, oh, there's room back there. I'm like, babe, what if we have like a shed design put back there? And she's like, well, let's just see what happens. They put it in. We're like, that actually doesn't look bad. It doesn't take up too much space. And so at the time, though, I was in a different part of Cisco where this was just going to be on the times I worked from home, a couple hours here and there or what have you, all be in here. of course, then the pandemic hit, and then I'm just in here all the time, and so I love the space, but it's a little cramped. So I'm like, well, heck, if I'm gonna be in here, I might as well like make it a space that I want to be in like all of the time. So of course, naturally, all the Star Wars stuff navigated in. And they're like, well, we got to do different lights, and then I got to do this, and you can't see it right now. We kind of can right here. This board. These are old, they're old fence boards from a neighbor at our old house, and my wife's like, I want reclaimed wood. Great. Get a whole stack of it. We never use it. Just sits in the garage. We could never come up with a thing to do with it. And then so we moved in here. I'm like, I'm just going to get rid of this. And then one day I'm like, that would look good on the wall. So I bought a brad nailer and I literally just put boards on the wall and started nailing them in. I didn't measure anything. I just put them up there. And then about 2 months ago, I'm like, you can use some color. And we had some old paint from Shanna's office. And so I've got like kind of roughly painted white and roughly painted green and blue. So it looks kind of like it's old and faded. Like it's just painted that way, and it was faded, but I just only kind of half painted it to make it look that way. So yeah, it's been fun. It's been good times.
Yeah, I'm telling you, like I think I've said it exactly this. You look like you're in some type of sci-fi speakeasy, and I'm sitting here with my bookshelves from IKEA. No, I'm I like the story, like the reclaimed wood, and now I'm going to age it and I'm going to apply the paint, and I think it's so funny to kind of see how everybody's home studio setup has been built in the pandemic.
I know.
What is really funny is that this is like the neat side of my office. I don't know if everyone else is like this. There's the neat side of my office, and then there's the like disaster that's right off screen. I'm very fortunate this is not too reflective of a television right now. So
you know what, I will say this. So you may have what you consider to be sort of a mess on the other side, but what everyone doesn't know is the rest of Ryan's office is basically just like the Library of Congress, just in his home. So it's basically these ancient books of beautiful books everywhere. You just don't see that. So and CK,
this is true.
CK, you're here. This is awesome. I am glad you caught us live. So CK is a friend of mine from a live streaming group that I'm in, and I'm stoked that she's here too. Rich, CK, and I are all part of the same group, and it's really rad. So awesome. Thank you for being here.
Good deal.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the show tonight, and our topic for the evening.
Yep, absolutely. So to get into before we dive into that, because this is going to be the topic that's your baby, and you're going to kick us off. So everyone knows this is kind of a special night for us. We set up Restream earlier today, and for live streamers, we'll know what that is. But for anybody else watching, basically it means that we're now live streaming, simulcasting essentially to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube all at the same time, which is in the world of live streaming isn't a huge deal. You can get that done pretty easily, but it feels really cool for the show. We've been doing this on YouTube for a long time now and really enjoy it. And it's nice to be able to broaden it out and get it to a wider audience without a lot of extra work. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, it's fun stuff. Yeah, right if you have questions throughout the show, throw them in the comments. We'll interact. We'll have fun. It'll be good. And I promise, Rich, as always, we promise, Rich, there will be Star Trek. It's a Star Wars show, but there's going to be Star Trek for Rich. Really just for Rich.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got them already baked in.
Excellent.
Yeah, that could be Star Trek is in the revision. Over to you,
buddy.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited about this topic because I think in a lot of previous episodes, Jeff, we often talk about how important it is to make choices. And that's in like all forms of art. Like it's wildly important to make choices. And in movies, especially, because if you don't make choices, it appears on screen. And one of the things that we've talked about, and a phrase that we've used in the past, is the art is in the revision. It's not in the act. That the real like test of time for any type of art, it's painting or music or anything, is in the after the production, like how you arrange it, how you organize it, the things that you add and the things that you take away. And Jeff, this is my plot twist. I have that quote. A thing that is often said is art is in the revision. I learned that quote from George Lucas, who himself said this and then said the exact opposite right afterwards. This is almost as good as "Special effects isn't story," another George Lucas quote. But while he was doing the prequels, while he was doing the special edition that came out in the 90s, he said, it's often said that art is in the revision. It's in the cutting of things and the removal of things. And we've talked about really great examples of that. And in another film series, like the Lord of the Rings film series, like in the original Fellowship of the Ring, they had a dual protagonist with Frodo and Aragorn, and they realized, oh wait, it's Frodo's story. And so what they did is they kind of removed a lot of the Aragorn chunk in Fellowship, and the story worked better. This is a lot of the same in Star Wars. Star Wars was the original Star Wars from 77, Empire and Jedi. They benefited from the things that George Lucas couldn't do or cut out because it wasn't working. And so he famously, while doing a press for the special editions, he says, art is in the revision, and we had to cut a lot of things out because they weren't working. And he cited, for example, Jabba the Hutt, and in the original Star Wars, he's like, it wasn't working. And then he said, but I guess I never learned that lesson because I always wanted to go back and add things in. And this starts what I feel like is the excess of Star Wars. It's like, yeah, like, anything's possible. And so because anything's possible, there's like no boundaries. And it's like, we're gonna put Jabba and Boba Fett in Star Wars now. We're gonna make the Return of the Jedi scene at Jabba's palace a full-on rock musical. And so George Lucas kind of abandons that idea, but revision is kind of the thing that made Star Wars great.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you've got a lot of ideas on that, and we've talked about things like that, like the translation of things like the original first draft of the Star Wars, where there's Anakin Starkiller, and how revising you get to Luke Skywalker. Or how Obi-Wan Kenobi, originally in the script, there was a lot of back and forth on, was Darth Vader his father? Did Obi-Wan kill Luke's father? And maybe that's the secret that's there. And the revision is, no, Vader's his father. And it's spoilers. And so it is so great because and Jeff, I'm really eager to hear about the things that you have found in this. Is that I think that the best part about revision is that there's an old quote, and I've talked about it before: kill your darlings. And what that means is that even if you love something that you've written, maybe it doesn't work, and you have to kind of let those things go. Mm-hmm. And for all writers and artists, I just love when you're able to say, you know what, this isn't working, I got to take this out, or this is a theme and I can build on it more. Like, I don't need to do Kane and Anakin Starkiller. I can just do Luke Skywalker, which is the character that he creates. So anyway, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting to me about everything you're just describing is I a couple additional like topics or like concepts or examples flowed in as I was thinking about that. And I was watching earlier because I needed a refresh on it, sort of the how the edits saved Star Wars, or the Star Wars, prior to it being called A New Hope. As everyone knows it now, it was just Star Wars. That was the name of the original movie. Yep. And how the edits saved it. So like the story is, and it's not story. What happened is Lucas was showing it to a couple friends of his, and I can't remember their names, but he goes and shows it to them. Goes to a small theater to do a showing, and one of the guys who was there in the audience, is a friend of his, also an editor and a writer, was like, "This is crap. This is horrible. What are you doing?" Mm-hmm. It was just because they had not even gotten to a point yet of like action scenes and lightsabers or guns, phasers or whatever they call them. Guns. Let's just call it guns. My brain is not working tonight. Like that.
Phasers, though, there's your Star Trek reference. There you go, Rich. Don't worry, I'm going to work in. We're going to get to photon torpedoes. We're going to get to dilithium crystals, warp plasma.
Gotta have plasma. Gotta have anyway. But they had left all this stuff in, and it wasn't that was bad. But basically, the feedback that he got, and that was absolutely not what Lucas wanted to hear. What he heard was, "There's nothing here. There's no story. This is choppy.
Mhm.
It moves around. Who do we follow? Why are we following them? What does this even mean?" And when they went back, he asked three people to help him. One of the people in the audience, another person, and then his wife, Marcia Lucas, to help do the editing. And when they went in, they like, okay, hold on, time out. And they literally chopped up everything that he had done, and
Yep.
almost
Yep.
they almost literally made an entirely new movie from what he had already put together. They chopped it up in such different ways that when you look through it, like there were so many scenes originally where it started on with Leia and the Star Destroyer going, and then immediately cut to Luke, doing something with a, there's a battle up in space, and it cuts to him on the planet. Then it cuts back up a moment later. Then it cuts back down again to him talking to his friends, and then him running a whole lot, and then running back. And what ended up happening was it was like you had two different storylines, like a Game of Thrones show, multiple
Mhm.
storylines,
Mhm.
but there wasn't any development for them. There was not enough time to develop. They were like, stay with him for this one for a little bit, then go over here. But there was no reason behind it. And it basically tried to create situations where there should have been a plot twist or a surprise, but it wasn't earned because you just were
Mhm.
handed. It was just given to you. The simple example is in the alleyway in Mos Eisley when the droids are hiding and they're trying to hide behind a door. What in the original cut, they just go behind a door closes, and the stormtroopers walk by and knock on the door, and then they just keep walking. That's the scene. And what they realize is like there's no suspense here. It's supposed to be a suspenseful scene, a scary. Oh shoot, they might get caught, but nothing happens. They go behind a
Yep.
door closes, a knock, okay, and they walk on, and the end of the scene. So nothing happens. And so what they ended up doing is they took a different scene that actually played later that they cut and they put back in front of that to basically have the droids open the door and go, oh shoot, lock the door locks, and then they inserted the scene where the stormtroopers walk up and knock, and you're like, oh, now there's some suspense. They could get caught if the stormtrooper just tried to jimmy the slice into the lock, but they didn't. Okay, everything was okay, at least for now. But it's to me, it's a clear example of, you have to tell a story. You have to know what your story is that you are telling. You need to know what the through line
Yep.
is so that you can take these pieces that are filmed and drop them on in the place they're supposed to make sense. But it seems like what Lucas did was film a bunch of stuff, put it together so that there's action. And I'm telling all these different stories, which, as you and I have talked about before,
Oh
that's
yeah.
kind of what Lucas does, is he kind of puts those things together, and you sit back and realize that like that's not a story. That's a lot of information, but there's no
Yeah.
story here. It doesn't you get no time to attach yourself to any of the characters while the film is happening. And when that occurs, you basically get, if you produced Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune, as a book, or even better, a better example, if you produced Stephen King's The Stand as it's written in the book, nobody would ever watch it. Like you'd be like, this is terrible. I am not, because almost the first 200 pages of that book are just setting up individual characters, and each character gets like 40 to 50 pages, and there's like 15 of them that have to be set up before you ever get to the point of like, and now the play kits. It's like, hey, something's about to happen, stop, we're now going to introduce you for 200 pages to all these characters. If you did that in that way in a movie, who the hell would watch that? Nobody would watch that. That's not interesting. So you have to do something to move that story along, to keep people. You can do flashbacks to people to give a touch base, but you can't just do what he did initially, because it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's actually one of the things that happens between the original trilogy and the prequels, is that in the original trilogy he was surrounded by people that were like, I don't know if this is gonna work, man. And and so they kept pushing him and pushing him, and boundaries and difficulties, it can sometimes like bring out the best, and I feel like that's like exactly what happens in like Empire Strikes Back, or even when they are editing the original Star Wars. And then excess, you can almost see it always in like a film, and that's like, we've talked about this, like the prequels or the Hobbit movies that Peter Jackson made, where it's like, yeah, let's just keep going, let's go bigger, it's like the biggest movie versus the best movie. um But a thing that you brought up, which I always think about, is like, different mediums. You got to kind of like optimize for it. You talked about Dune. Like Dune is in my opinion almost like an impossible movie to make. But I'm really excited to see the one that's coming out here soon.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's gonna be great. But I'm also a big fan of the David Lynch version from the '80s. But I mean, it's amazing to me how everything is kind of being picked up to be used. Like Isaac Asimov's Foundation is being turned into a series, or it's already a series on HBO, I think. And I've read a lot of that, and I remember hearing, oh, they're going to turn that into a show, and I thought, how?
Yeah.
um and I get it. Like, I mean, you can put a lot of things in the movies, and you can definitely like make things work. Like you were talking about Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones has so much detail. There's so much going on. There's so much characterization. There's so many. But that first season of Game of Thrones is almost perfect. I mean, it is light. It moves. You get introduced to characters. You stay with them. At the end of the first season, when those dragons come out, that was life changing. That
Mm-hmm.
was great, and all of that though is making choices. And it kind of goes back to, like, if you've ever been a kid and you're having to write like an essay or anything, if you've done any type of writing, or an email, and you just send it off. Um, uh, uh, so much great writing comes in the reread.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't learn that until I went through college. I thought I was how does there's a phrase from the Venture Brothers that I always like, which is, oh, you think you're you think you're hot shit in a champagne glass, but you're really cold dookie in a Dixie cup or something. And it's like, I thought I was great. I thought I was great when I was a writer in college, and I fortunately had a lot of great professors who told me otherwise, and said, you need to read your writing. You need to start making those choices after. And so that art being in the revision, it's like what you're saying. It's like those things. It's like those scenes where you're able to take or add things in. I,
Mm-hmm.
I think Star Wars, the original Star Wars, is saved in the editing.
Oh, 100% agree.
I think, and that's why she won an Oscar. Marsha
Yes.
Lucas won an Oscar for that. So
Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm thinking to, speaking of sort of like crisscrossing over to the writing side, I'm thinking of Neil Gaiman, taking some of his listening to some of his kind of teachings on like how he goes about writing and how he kind of teaches the young writer, not young in age, but young in their career. And the way that he talks a lot about this, I know a lot of writers do, but that's my favorite reference. He talks about, you have a beginning, you have an idea, and some of those ideas just will never pan out to anything, but you have an idea. And when you sit down to say, I want to see if this idea is going to work, you sit down and say, here's the idea. And then you end up working through this concept of like, where do I think this story is going to conclude? Like, and not the end of the story, not deciding the end, but like, where do I think this story is going? And then from there, it's almost like picturing a map. I want to get to, we're in the Bay Area, NorCal. I want to get to SoCal. But there's a bunch of different ways to get down there. I
Yep.
just know that along that way, I'm going to have to hit a couple gas stations, probably hit a rest stop, probably grab a bite to eat. But other than those things, the path can go almost anywhere you want it to go. And so the way he sort of described it that really clicked with me was, when you try to decide this is what the end is going to be, then you're almost forced into writing backward from the ending, which never ever works because
No.
you don't have an opportunity to allow a character to develop into whatever the character is going to develop, or more importantly, you let yourself go down a path and then realize, that path doesn't actually work because it doesn't get the character where it doesn't feel like the character is actually going where they naturally should go, and then stop, walk that back, like you said, walk back that path back to the last fork in the road, stop and go, okay, hold on, maybe I need to continue this character needs to continue this way for a while, and then make some other decision later on to see where that character goes. And I think too often what happens is, and I think getting back to the Lucas thing here in a second, too often what happens is that if you don't allow yourself to sort of like Adam Grant would say, like rethink or think again about this choice that you just made, about a
Yep.
character or a world or a situation, then what ends up happening, you're like, no, it's great. I'm just going to get to the end. And then you have what happened with Lucas the first time. And then getting back to him for a second, you said something really interesting. The distinction between the first trilogy, and then of course he went back later on when he was big and famous, and it's George Lucas, and added all kinds of crap back in that it drives me. I don't even actually, in those edits, I don't actually enjoy watching the original trilogy. I mean, I do. I will watch them and I have
Yeah,
fun
yeah.
watching them, but
But
it's not the same as it was when we were younger, because it, like, all this CG and added, like, none of this stuff is needed to make this story a compelling, like, this is just fluff that's cool. There's creatures now in Mos Eisley that look like a horse. Cool. What does that add to any? This doesn't add anything to what's going on. And I think a suspicion I've had for a while is that, to your point, in this first series when he was first doing it, he wasn't a person. Nobody knew him. Like, he's making this.
yeah.
So people had like, dude, I'll tell you all day long. Like, you're what you made sucks. You need to go back and redo it. But later, when it comes back in, no, well, it's George Lucas. You don't tell George Lucas. It's like Coppola. You don't tell Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola, no, you're not going to do that. Like, he says this is what it does. Like, Anumina Patre, Fili, like, he does that. And like, this is what you're going to do. And I think that was sort of the fallacy, or what ended up happening in the prequel trilogy. So much green screen, so much CG. He over rotated from what Peter Jackson has tended to do in the original Lord of the Rings series. We can talk about The Hobbit at a different time because that's a whole other problem. But the original Lord of the Rings series, we talked about this last time, with film everything on set as much as you can, use miniatures, and then their idea of bigatures wherever possible, CG only where you need it. And do it, absolutely do it. But if you can do it in a set or a soundstage, or build a miniature and a bigature for it, do that, because the filming will then be of a real substantive thing, as opposed to graphics that have to line up perfectly. And too much of the prequel trilogy has that latter part. And it's unfortunate because for me at least, it takes me out of the films. It's really hard to enjoy them completely because you can see the offsets of lightsaber fights and bouncing a bolt back to something that is actually shifted off a little, just enough that you're like, that doesn't, like, oh God. Now I can't unsee that. Like, I can't unsee that it's supposed to hit that that creature on whatever planet was, like, the bolt's gonna hit, and it just, you can actually see it miss it a little bit, but it still falls, and you're like, okay.
Oh no, by the way, I think Rogue One is a movie that's saved in the editing, because they reshot and did a lot of that. But I completely agree with you. So two things on that. Like, one, especially with the prequels, like, I think, I can see all these things in the prequels where it'll just drive me nuts. Like for example, in episode 2, Anakin is like running into Padme's bedroom. By the way, that whole sequence is so weird.
Yes.
Actually, like,
it's just creeper level. It really is.
Yeah, those movies are really weird because it's like, movies should have something to say. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, like, what are you trying to say here, George? Are you like into fascism? What is it? But the thing that's weird is Anakin comes in, he runs into Padme's bedroom, and there's these snakes or worms that are poison, and they're gonna kill Padme, and he has to hit them with his lightsaber. But because his lightsaber obviously is not making contact with anything that's anywhere near the actors, they have to make his lightsaber like 3 feet long at one point. And I can't unsee that every time I see him swing, because he has to hit those worms. And I'm sure they were like, cut, check the gate, we got it, let's move on. and I'm sure that even Hayden Christensen was like, I don't think I hit the worm. And they were like, no, it's cool, we'll get it in post. And that's the problem, is there's so many things that it's like, we'll just get it in post. And go ahead.
I was gonna say that phrase. So we're in tech, and we work for a company. Like a lot of people work for tech companies, and I think James, by the way, thanks for joining, man. It's awesome to have you here, and Joanna's here too.
Thank you. Oh, right on. Good deal.
But we hear this. We used to joke about this when I was in sales, but we hear this all the time in technology. Go to a thing like, oh, what's happening there? Oh, that's on the roadmap. Ah, crap, I was road mapped. And to me, the like, we'll fix it in post is that. It's like, ah, crap, we'll fix it in post. That basically means you're building a backlog of like, yeah, I'm not going to worry about that right now. We'll come back and we'll throw some CG at it, or we'll throw some money at it, or whatever, and maybe it'll just kind of like, we just won't care about it. It's like, okay, like don't do that. Don't diminish that.
And again, this is all about like making choices and like crafting these scenes. So today, my boys, I have twin sons that are 4 years old for people here on the call, and they were like bouncing off the walls. And my sons love dinosaurs, or as every dinosaur is dino bones, and so I was like, hey, do you guys want to see some cool dinosaurs? And I could remember the sequence all the way back from 1994 of when Sam Neill sees the Brachiosaurus
Yep.
in Jurassic Park, and we had Jurassic Park.
I knew exactly what you were talking about.
Pulled up that sequence, and my boys, who it's hard to get one of them to sit down, if not both of them to sit down. I threw that scene on, and they were like, "Oh, my gosh!" And of course, the John Williams theme is, Wells, and my sons are just like, they just can't stop watching it. I mean, they're just like, "Oh my gosh, this is great!" And of course, like Jurassic Park's like a horror movie, so you can't watch much more than that. But they were just totally pulled into that. But that's because that was a moment that they figured out how to manage, like on-set production, post graphics, post CGI that they were going to do, practical effects that they knew that they were going to do, but they also spent a lot of time just on getting the reactions of them all. There's also there's a near infamous you son of a bitch, you did it. It's the Jeff Goldblum. He's in the car, and he's peak Goldbluming, and it's that and the life finds a way moment. Those sequences are so great because choices are being made. The revisions happening inside of the editing bay, they know what they can do, and they know what's not working, and they're cutting it. They're not like, let's add in pterodactyls, and maybe we'll add in some other crazy things over here. There are, I think, a total of, there's the one dinosaur that you see, which almost is like an elephant, it does like the kind of circus act thing. And then they cut to two other brachiosauruses and then a couple other dinosaurs off in the distance. You can't even see them clearly. And that sequence is just as powerful 1994 as it is now 2021 to 4-year-olds that see things like all this stuff that's been produced on CGI. And I'll just say this. I think one of the things that happens to very successful directors is this, like, I'm never gonna die attitude. Like, I can do anything.
People love my work.
Yeah, and so you get like Peter Jackson, who does like a lot of like kind of funny little horror movies, and then he makes Lord of the Rings, and he suffers the same issue that Lucas does. He then goes and makes a 3-hour King Kong movie, and he makes the Hobbit movies, which it's got their issues. And Spielberg runs into the same problems. So does of course George Lucas. So does J.J. Abrams. I think they get lost in like it's like they're getting high on their own supply. And so then they lose that critical eye that you need, or you need another person to come in and tell you this is crap. You can't do this.
I think so let's talk about the Lord of the Rings movies for a second, because I think there's a ton in the how the story made it to the movie, to the film, and what we actually saw, and in the editing, tons of the editing. But what was interesting to me about that is, one, right off the bat, they had, for each movie, I want to say they had 4 directors per movie. I'm Pete, was clearly filming. He was a director, a primary director on the first film,
Yep.
on Fellowship of the Ring, but he had a slightly stepped back role as a director in the second two movies. But they filmed all those movies in 100 days. All three movies were filmed back to back, which is like unheard of for filming. Like 30, 45 days is about normal. They
Hmm.
filmed all three of those movies back to back. It took them, I think it was 100 days, or no, maybe it was longer than that. I heard one time it was maybe 15 months, but I think it was like 120 days of like solid shooting to get.
Oh yeah, they were there. They were there for because they were on location for more than a year.
Yeah, I think they were on location for like 15 months, and then of
Yeah,
that, there was like 100 and something days of like solid. We are just filming. That is what we
yeah,
are doing. What
yeah.
I find interesting about those is by having multiple directors, even some that were some like actually producers as well, working alongside a director, or like Andy Serkis and towards the end of it, and then I think Barry Allen was his name, like working in concert, they were able to film things in their ways on totally separate parts of the island from where Pete was
Yep.
at, and he might have some artistic information on it, but he left it to them to come up with these shots that they needed that could be inserted later. But my favorite part about this is, and people contest it. There's lots of people I know who contest this, but I think this is a key in the editing. It's in the story writing or the script writing, but it's also in the editing. Is they did film some scenes where, if you think of in Ithilien, where we meet Faramir before we get to Osgiliath,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and there's the sacred pool, and Gollum is there drinking from it or fishing from it, and they're almost going to kill him. Anyway, they take him up. In the book, what happens is Frodo meets Faramir, and they're having a conversation, and Faramir makes some comment about the ring, or Frodo's like, this is a heavy burden, and Faramir's like, oh, can I see it? And he holds it, and Faramir's like, oh, that's kind of cool, and hands it back to him. He goes, I wouldn't keep this
Yeah.
I wouldn't keep this if you begged me and whatever else. And then that's it.
If I found it on the side of the road, I'd leave it. It's a
Exactly.
line that's like that. Yep.
Yeah, but what they said, they filmed it. They actually filmed that originally, and it had an intense scene where he was like really, sorry, no, like where he did that basically. And what they changed it to was the alternate, what we actually see. And I know many people who can't stand that, but when you listen to Philippa Boyens talk about why they did it, is in the writing, and they realized they had to change the script and refilm it when they got towards an editing process, when they did some pickups later on, is that in the story, this is a plot device. This thing is a plot device that completely corrupts everybody. Absolutely, there's no.
Yep.
You are corrupted. Absolutely, the end. Even Bilbo, even though he was good, you could see him in the one scene in the Hobbit hole where his face gets all dark, and
Oh yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
just it corrupts absolutely. And so here's a
Mhm.
character where hand the ring to him, and he's like, that's kind of cool. Hands it back, and it doesn't do it. It doesn't even phase him. He's like, yeah, no words whatsoever. Her comment is that it completely broke down the entire story. Here we've spent a movie and a half telling you this is the most horrible thing in the world. We have to destroy it. And then a random just dude goes, that's kind of cool. Hands it back to you. Your entire audience is like, wait, hold on. You just told me this was what? And she's like, you would lose everything you just did. To me,
Yeah.
that is what you were describing earlier about making decisions and killing your darlings. The idea of I wanted this. This is where we wanted it to go because that's what the book does and blah blah blah. But if we're going to put this in this movie, it's just not going to work, and you have to just be okay with that because you need the story in this film to move forward and keep people going along with it. It isn't a book. And so translating a book directly to a movie just simply does not work. And I mean, look at, like you said, look at Dune, look at the original Dune movie from the 80s. And you look at it and like all the thinking that's said out loud and like the
Hmm.
people's thoughts constantly happening. You're like, I watched part of it the other night. I was watching this, the Space Guild, the Navigator, show up and talk to the Emperor, and
Oh
I'm
yeah.
watching this, and you hear him talk in his head. I'm like, but it's a long dialogue. Like he talks in his head for like 45 seconds, and I'm like, dude, why are you still in your own head, man? People are around you. It really confused me about the movie. I watched it, I'm like, now I remember why you said this, and it's a good example of I get it, why you did it, but it doesn't help actually keep people engaged. You lose people when that happens, and it breaks down the story you're actually trying to tell.
Yeah, yeah, and by the way, like, I got to give a lot of passes for movies in the '80s because, like, cocaine, man,
That's
it
all you have to
was,
say. You just go can.
yeah, it's like, see the Flash Gordon movie,
Oh my
also
god.
produced by Dino De Laurentiis. That's all cocaine decisions. The thing though that I think is really interesting is, and I really like using the for when you talk about art in the revision, and is using the Lord of the Rings movies, because and I think it's great that you use the Two Towers movie as one of, as your example there with Faramir, is that you can see the theatrical cut of those movies, and you can also see the extended editions. And to me, the extended editions are great if you're a fan and you're like, oh man, I want to see all of those things. Like, really, like, I can't wait to see more of Rivendell. Like, really show me Rivendell. I want to see all of those other things that, that dialogue between, Boromir and Aragorn when they're talking about the shards of Narsil. Like, show me more of that conversation. And that's great, but man, is the theatrical cut of that movie tight. It's moving, it
Yes.
doesn't stop. There's also, it doesn't interrupt your emotion, like, a spoiler, Boromir dies, and spoilers for a 90-year-old book, 80-year-old book.
I hope that's not a spoiler for
Boromir
anybody. I really
dies,
do.
and Aragorn, the scene that they originally filmed is, it was very much like the book, where Aragorn kind of leans down and he kisses his forehead and he says, "Be at peace, son of Gondor." And then they show the reaction shots of all of the other characters, and then Aragorn crying in the forest, and it's a great shot. In the extended edition, I want to say that Aragorn has a line, and it's something like, "They will look for him from the towers and he won't come." And it's like not a needed line. It's only there if you know that line from the book, but otherwise it interrupts the emotion of the scene. And that's where, it's almost like making those choices where originally they were going to have Bilbo do all of the over narration, and Ian Holm is a great actor. I love his Bilbo, but oh my gosh, like having Ian McClellan do the introductions to the hobbits as they're going into Hobbiton, going into the Shire, I feel far superior than in the extended edition.
Yeah,
and so
actually, that line you mentioned
ahead.
a second ago, where Aragorn makes that, it says that line in the extended edition, and it's very much in keeping with how Tolkien liked to write in general, to a lesser degree within the Lord of the Rings series, specifically the Lord of the Rings series, not the Silmarillion and not the Lost Tales and all those things, but he used a lot of prose, or in Middle English style writing in how he wrote. And so that's kind of almost talking in prose a little bit is what that line is in the movie.
Yeah.
And to your point, no one understands it unless you're a fan. You don't understand why he's saying that. And it's basically like injecting some prose-based speak into a movie where you're not doing that anywhere else. And it's like, wait, hold on. How does that dialogue, like, did you just speak a poem, but why did you say that? And the moment you have to get an audience questioning a thing, you force them out of the situation. You've literally pushed them out of the emotion. You push them out of the story for a minute, because now they have to go into the appendix and read and go, like, wait, what? That's it. You've paused the movie so everyone can take a break and walk away for a few minutes. And the moment you do that, they come back and go, wait, where were we at again? And that's not, you don't want people to be doing that. That's not where you want them. And you want them to continue. You just reminded me of an example in the theatrical release at the completion of the Battle of Helm's Deep, when the Rohirrim sort of
they ride in.
They ride in, fight off all the Uruk-hai. Uruk-hai flee, and the Rohirrim kind of ride a little bit, and they're like make safe the city. They don't. That's the third movie, but they say something like that, and they all stop, and that's the theatrical.
Yeah, they stop,
and the Uruk-hai run, and that's it. And they go, okay, cool, and they set to, and like it works. In the extended edition, they actually do what's in the book, which is they ride them to the trees, and when they ride them to the trees, those trees that are there are called Hurons, which are basically like not Ents. They're just basically like old, really pissed off trees, but they don't protect anybody. They would hurt anybody if they got near. And the Uruk-hai run into the trees, and the Huron that had marched from from Barad-dûr. Not Barad-dûr. Why am I blanking on names now?
Oh, Orthanc.
Thank you. When they march on their own, we see them early in the movie, and it's like, oh, where are those trees going? I think Pepin says that, and he goes, "Where are those trees going?" Oh, they have business elsewhere. My business is with Sauron tonight. And that
Yeah.
happens in the book. The Hurons all march, like Fangorn basically marches to Helm Deep. These almost like barbaric trees that aren't thinking coherently. And in the skin edition, you see that, you watch that happen, and it's fantastic because it saddles like, oh, a geek thing. But none of that is necessary. Like where it ends in the theatrical release, that's all you need to know. You
Yep.
just need to know that we won. The Uruk-hai run off, and they're scattered, they're destroyed, they're mostly dead, they're just
Yep.
gone. We don't need to know that they ran into a bunch of trees and trees killed them. Like, that's cool, but it doesn't keep the story going. It actually interrupts the story that was already being told because you got to wait for a minute or two for everyone. Because literally, it's like stop, everyone stop, let them run to the trees, don't go into the trees, and then they all just sit on their horses and watch it happen for a minute. And you're like, no, I mean, as a geek, I was like, I love that part of the book.
Oh yeah, that was great to see. Like,
Yeah,
as someone who loved the books in the moment, but yeah,
as a casual viewer, they're like, wait, what are those trees? But I thought there was only ints, and I thought there was only a few ints because you just told me a little bit ago that there's only a few of
Yeah.
us left. And we just saw a few
Yeah.
of them march. So who are these guys? I thought that you start making people have to ask all these questions, and like you want to try to avoid that wherever you can. And so the fact going back and saying, great that we have it, we'll add that in later, someone can watch it if they really want to see it, but it doesn't keep our story moving, so let's keep it out for now.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Again, I can spend this again could be the One Ring chat. I can spend this evening talking about
I'm
how,
sorry, Rich.
again, you can
We've decided we're not moving to Star Trek. We're actually just going to move over to
right
Middle
into
Earth.
Lord of the Rings now.
Just
Yeah.
Silmarillion
Welcome
forever.
back to the Shire chat. So
Fireside chats and Hobbiton.
yeah, and again, choices, revision. It's never too late to make the right decision. They had cast Aragorn. It was going to be Stuart Townsend. They brought him on set. They had him there for like, I don't know, 4 months getting ready. And the day before he was supposed to start filming, they got rid of him. I think that it's never too late to make the right decision when you're looking at your artwork, whether it's writing or it's music or it's movies. And you can you see it like kind of all the time. I feel like Lord of the Rings is a really great example because you can see all of the things, all of the production was documented, so you can see all of these choices as they're being made, and even just like the work that went into making sometimes the hardest decision, like cutting an actor that's not working, or recognizing that originally they were going to try to work Arwen in a lot more into like the Helm's Deep battle. They filmed it, and then they realized this doesn't work. We can't have Arwen at Helm's Deep, and in all of that, it all comes down to choices. And what I love though is when the choice is forced upon you and you have to make the best decision in the moment. And I can think of two things. And you were talking about one where it's like, there's the orcs, they're running into the forest, and they all die out there. And we got to see it in the extended edition. And the thing that the big error that I feel like that they did in Empire Strikes Back, the special edition, is when I was a kid, I was totally freaked out by the Wampa. And I think it's because it's the same rules as what happens in Jaws. In Jaws, you don't see the shark for a long time. You only see the effects of the shark. So by the time the shark pops out of the water behind Roy Schneider, and Chief Brody's walking backwards, and he says, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." It's a reveal, and it's oh my gosh, that's the shark. You are shocked by it. In the original Empire Strikes Back, you don't see the Wampa, you only hear it, and then you see its like its feet moving. I spent all my time with the 4-year-olds. My foots. So they're the Wampa. You can only hear the Wampa, and you can hear you can see the legs moving, and that increases that tension. And then the music's rising. That Luke is trapped. And then what's the focus of the scene? It's him using the Force to free himself. And they're also letting you know, like, here's a thing that the Force can do. You can move things with your mind. And this is a big scene because Luke's going to need to do this again and again and again, and he's got to, and he ends the movie the way he starts the movie, which is hanging upside down. And in both cases, kind of using the Force to get himself out of these problems. But in the special edition, George Lucas was like,
more Wampa. You know what this needs? It needs more Wampa.
More Wampa, yeah, exactly.
It's our cowbell scene. I got a fever. The only prescription. It's more Wampa. Sorry.
Get more Wampa in this. The thing that I think is funny is he says in an interview on that subject, he said, people would say that it was probably more artistic that you don't see the Wampa, but I really wanted to see it. And I get it. You're the director, and it's no, you're not the director of Empire. You're the producer of Empire. Kirshner is the director of Empire. And I get it. He wants to see the Wampa. And so he forces it in. And it really ruins what is a great scene. Empire, to me, like people, I'm sure you get this question a lot, like, what do you like more, like the original Star Wars or Empire? And I feel like it's a split between what is an excellent story and what is excellent execution. Star Wars is an excellent story, and Empire is amazing execution. It's like a perfect movie, and it's up there with Fellowship to me. It's one of these movies that's like, find the scene that's wrong, find the scene that's wasted. Look at the action, look at all the acting, the dialogue, everything, the looks that they give each other. All of it is just, it's clean, it's light, it's moving. Do you feel real threat and danger? And they add a lot of risk for these characters to engage with. And so that's why it's got the least amount of add-ins from George, and all of them take you out of the movie. So the Wampa's there, it takes you out of the movie. Now you're focused on the Wampa, when you should be focused on him using the Force.
Yes.
Or Vader, originally, after Luke throws himself off the Cloud City and he's in the tubes and whatnot, and he's hanging from the bottom of Cloud City, it cuts to Vader, and in the original in the original film, he says, "Bring my shuttle." And he's pissed. Like, that line read is great because he's failed. He's told his son, like, I'm your dad, and we could rule the galaxy as father and son, and you can help liberate me from my, like, terror, and justify all of these terrible decisions that I've made. Terrible toxic parental relationship, by the way. I was, it's a step beyond, I don't want your life. So in the special edition, instead, because George was like, people are going to ask, how does he get back to his Star Destroyer? I was never asking that. I watched that movie like 600 times. I never thought that. Instead, he's walking out, and the line read is, prepare my Star Destroyer, tell my Star Destroyer to prepare for my arrival. And then they even cut to a sequence of his shuttle going up to the Star Destroyer, him landing, reusing stuff from
literally Jedi. Never thought, like, the dude,
terrible.
The dude is creepy. He deflects Han's blaster bolts with his hand, pulls things away. I'm pretty sure the dude's gonna find his way back to wherever he needs to go. Like, I just assumed he's gonna be fine. Like, actually, I don't think I assumed that because I didn't care. He's not the person that I care about. Like, he did the bad thing to my favorite character at that point in that movie. All I care about is Luke. The part that I wanted them to leave at and for the rest of the movie do not show Vader is Luke falls, Vader kind of reaches for him a little bit, and then just pauses there for a moment, and then it cuts scenes. Like, great. So there's almost I wanted to help you, but I couldn't quite bring myself to actually help you because I'm torn. And then Luke. And that's it. And that's all I need to know. I don't need anything else at that point. But you're right. When you add that other stuff, it's like, dude, I don't need to know this. Like, I don't care if he succeeds. I don't want Vader to succeed. Like, that's not what I want to see happen. So you just let that go. And then when he shows up again, just shows up in Return of the Jedi, you're like, dude, it just reinforces how ominous this guy is, because no matter what you do, he's like Michael Myers. Like, the dude just do things to him, and he just keeps showing up. But when you show things like take him to my Star Destroyer as you described, to me it's almost like that's those times where you don't want to humanize a character, because the intent behind, he's already been made to be as non-human as possible without saying he's a
Yeah.
droid, without saying, short of saying he is a droid and that's all he is. You've made him as inhuman as you possibly can. That's the
Yeah.
allure and that's the freakiness of that character. But when you do things like that, you make him narcissistic, all these things that are very human qualities, you inject that all back in. It's like, I don't need him to be multi-layered. I need him to be a very single-minded, always after this, always going. That's what makes him scary. That's what makes him freaky. When
Yeah.
you give him all this context, it's great to learn that stuff in like animated series and things later on when we want to fill in some gaps because it's interesting. But
Totally.
if that is because that moves a different story along, it doesn't help this story move forward. It just distracts from it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens, is that he gets caught up, like, and this happens with the directors, and again, like, George is like all gas and no brakes. Like, he's there's nobody telling him, like, I don't think you need to mess with that. That movie was nominated for Academy Awards. I might just leave it alone. Um it's funny because all I keep thinking is Francis Ford Coppola, like, wanting to be like, wouldn't it be cool if Michael had some type of, I don't know, CGI puppy? And it's like, no, like, there's no reason. Like, we don't need like, the frame doesn't need to be filled with stuff all the time. But it's also because one of the things that I feel like you have to do with and this is another thing that this is another quote that I learned from George Lucas, is no art is finished. All art has to be abandoned. And this from a guy who, like, could never abandon it, so keeps tinkering with the stuff that should be done. And it's because he's not the same guy that he was in the 80s. So when he keeps going back to it and tinkering with it, and he keeps going back to it and tinkering with it, he's a different person then. The movies mean different things. He's forgetting that in that scene with Vader, that we're all still, like, if you were new to Star Wars or Empire in that moment, you're still coming to terms with, is that guy lying? Is he really Luke's father? And the weight of what Luke has suffered, this like terrible physical trauma, and our focus is with Luke. And as a friend of mine said, when he was watching this in the theater, when it came out, he said, my whole focus was, oh man, they better hurry up and go and get Han Solo because this movie's about to end. And that's because that's where everybody's focus was. It wasn't like, how does Darth Vader get back to his Star Destroyer? I mean, I don't get it. And that's why art has to be abandoned. You have to get to a point where you kind of leave something behind and say, I can't go back and pick the threads of this up. I find old things that I write all the time, and they're less stories that I think that I could continue to write, and more a window into who I was as a writer then, or even who I was as a person then. It's like time travel. I can't go back to that time and place. I can maybe start new, and I might be able to take that as inspiration, but I definitely can't start a sentence in 1994 and then think that I can finish it in the same way.
No, I don't think anybody should, like, thinking that you can do that, like, and pick up and I'll redo my own work from back then. It's like, no, like, the best thing that you can do is do new things that are informed by the things you're now realizing about what you did before. And I think this is actually why good point, Joanna. That's a really good point. I think that's actually a really good point. I think it's one of the reasons why Filoni, specifically for Dave Filoni, but then also for like Jon Favreau and all the other directors of the more current Star Wars movies we've been seeing, is they are informed in part by Lucas. He provides insight when they ask for it, and all. Like, he's not there directly telling them, here's how you have to do this film, but they will go to him and he'll provide insight. He'll show up and they'll talk, and he'll provide input on backstory. Like, he basically opens up the Lord of the Rings index and says, I got a question about this. Well, here's what their motivation was. Here's the index information. So then that director or producer can then say, okay, maybe I'd make a different creative choice than I was going to, now that I understand a little bit more about who that character actually is as just a character. It's why I've loved everything Filoni does. I think it's why Filoni's had such success with his projects in Star Wars.
Yes.
And why they are revitalized. They have revitalized people who've loved it forever, as well as brought in a whole new group, more so than anyone else could do. Not just because Dave is really good at what he does. I think it's
Yeah.
in my opinion, it's mostly because he is informed by the lessons, by watching the lessons that Lucas has learned, and he may or may not say it, but like the things that Lucas probably flubbed on a little bit, like going back and editing a little too much of his past works. Not that, but like watching these things play out, whether you think it actively or not, is going to inform the thing that you're doing. And I think that's evidenced by the work that we see Filoni put out there. It's very clearly the vision of George Lucas and the Star Wars that he envisioned, but Filoni has put his own spin on it and then taken the spirit of what those characters are supposed to be, what they were built as, and taken them sort of, as Gaiman would say, let them go to their actual conclusion. Or Kevin Scott, who writes a lot of the High Republic books and been writing Star Wars forever, one of our like the favorite characters in one of the most recent books he put out for the High Republic, has that character's conclusion in the book is a surprise to everybody, and it's not what anybody expected it to be. And people afterwards like, Cav, you know what you did. And when he was in an interview, he was like, characters have to go where they go, and whether you want that to be the case or not, when the conclusion starts to become evident to you as a writer, either an author, a script writer, a director, a producer, whatever, if that's the direction the character feels like it feels like that's where they're going, you need to just let them go that way, because if you don't, it feels forced. The audience will notice it. You will pick up on it, whether you understand what it is you're picking up on or not. You are going to, and I think the success of these directors, like in The Mandalorian and every episode of The Mandalorian, the conclusion got to where that character needed to go. Whether we wanted that to happen or not, it happened the way it really needed to happen. And so to your point about Game of Thrones, killing off your darlings, it's not really about like, just do it because. You do it because in a feudal society like in Game of Thrones, fiefdoms and all this type of stuff, people are just going to die. It's going to happen. And just because you like that character doesn't mean shit's just not going to get real for them at some point. Someone's going to, like, that is how that society was going to play out. Just because you like the character, no one's sitting back going, ha ha ha, I'll kill that character because it's going to make you mad. Okay, it's easy to think that, but the reality is it's much more likely that it just made sense for that character to go to that conclusion as part of the story, because that's what aids into the storytelling.
We've never really talked about Game of Thrones, but I think that a really great example of like what you have in like a really great writer like George R.R. Martin, who has dedicated years to his craft, who's done amazing work. I only have the highest respect for George R.R. Martin. You can see that come to pass in those early seasons of Game of Thrones. And then you can see where they don't have that source material to lean on, and you start to struggle in season 7 and 8 in really big ways. And again, it's because a lack of understanding of choices. You have things happening because the script says for them to happen, and you have characters that are wrapped in, I love this term, plot armor. This character has to survive because everybody likes her, or everybody likes them, or we're gonna pull the rug out and we're gonna kill this character, or we're only gonna kill minor characters. And it's like Harry Potter suffers from that, I think, actually, from time to time, where we're gonna kill an important character off screen. Oh my gosh, like, why would you do that? There's reasons when you make those choices as a writer or an author or any type of artist, you should be doing it because there's a reason that you're doing that. You're trying to get somewhere. It's not just because it's like, oh well, hey, some people have bad luck. It's like, no, you can't just do that. That's like kind of a cop out. There's a lot of really smart choices that George R.R. Martin is making, that in comparison to Dan and Dave, I think it is, on who are the producers of the show, they really struggle in kind of season 7 and 8 because they don't have those source material to kind of lean on. All of these things, though, that you were talking about, I just keep thinking about how, that's why I think I really like The Last Jedi, because The Last Jedi to me is a movie that is making choices, and some of those choices people disagree with, but it is what it is. Like, I'm all behind it.
I think
yeah.
It's, what is the term I heard recently? Your choices. This was in context for something different. Like it was in context for leadership, I think. But I think that it works for this too, which is your choices as an author and as a screenplay writer, screenwriter, should be disputable. But
Yes.
what I mean by disputable is not that they're up for debate, not that someone can come to you and say, "I don't agree with you, let's change it." I don't mean that, but that people can feel some sort of way, or as we talk to our kids about it, like our kid, you can feel some big feels and dispute the decision that was made about that character
Yeah.
or that plot line. That's what makes for a really good story in a book or in a movie, is that there is a margin for dispute of that, which allows you and I to have like these discussions. Because if it was
Oh yeah.
if the situation was everyone agrees this is what happens, it's not a bad thing, but it loses its interest because there's no suspense. You don't earn anything when that happens. You didn't have to earn that situation happening that way. But when it's disputable, you're like, wait, whoa, hold, what did you just do? Stop. No, when someone reacts that way, it's like that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to make you feel a set of ways, some big feelings about that thing, good, bad, and different. Bring up PTSD, bring
Yeah.
up old things in your own life where you're like, holy crap, that really made me rethink parts of my own life. Excellent. Like that is what you want. You want people to
Yes.
feel like they can dispute the thing that you just did, because it means that what happened is probably what's supposed to happen. But when you don't feel that way, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
That
and
it
I
just
and I think
it
too.
doesn't it falls flat. It doesn't feel interesting. There's no suspense. There's no interest in that anymore.
No, exactly. I mean, I think that's where it's so important when you're kind of looking at stories that are like this, where you can take a stand. You can like Luke, I am your father. I remember the most. I talked to a lot of people who went to that theater and saw it in the theater, and I said, "What was your first thought about that? Like when you heard Luke, or I'm sorry, no, I am your father is the line." And he everybody that I ever talked to said I thought he was lying because he's a bad guy. Of course he's lying. And that's why they had to start um a part of they had to actually have Luke talk to Yoda. They actually had in the screenplay, they added that line, those lines in, because they needed to confirm to the audience that Vader was his father, because that was such a big deal that people didn't accept it. You talked though about a thing that Dave Filoni did, and I feel like this is kind of where we're going in this art is in the revision, and really this kind of talk about art in general, which is Dave Filoni saw everything that Star Wars was and then kind of took it forward. And when I was in my writing program, one of the things that we were encouraged to think of was is that we were like immigrants to a brand new country, and that behind us was all of the history that got us here, and that it was our job not to try to mimic the writers of old, but to build, to take everything that they've done and then push the medium forward. George Lucas did that with THX 1138 and American Graffiti and Star Wars. And then he kind of didn't realize that he's not the guy anymore to move that forward.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great Walt Whitman poem called Pioneers, Oh Pioneers. And in that poem, there's a line that says, shrouded bards of distant lands, you may rest, you've done your work. And that's because they're not the pioneers anymore. Dave Filoni's that pioneer. There are all of these other people that the torch has to pass to, and I think that the only reason it's not is that it's very highly corporatized now, like a lot of these movies. So they want a bankable name, they want a bankable director, but there are some amazing talents, and that's why I think it was such a great thing to try to do. Give Ryan Johnson an opportunity to make a Star Wars movie. Who really an unbankable director who's now been given that outside of like a couple of movies that he's done, or to even go to Colin Trevorrow and the Duel of the
Mm-hmm.
Fates. That's like reverse. That's like the anti-revision that I don't like, which is an overcorrection to try to make it playing it safe.
Yep.
So yeah, I want to see those pioneers, because I think that they're not so in love with their work that they can kill their darlings.
I agree. Well, we should probably wrap on this because I think that's a good place to land. You maybe what you just this isn't nearly as eloquent as that Whitman poem, but you're reminding me of a book that I read years ago that was suggested to me. But I think it it encapsulates what you're saying too, which is what got you here won't get you there. It's
Yes.
I think it's the same sort of it's a less eloquent version of what you had just said, but I think it's the same core point with what the actions and things you did to get to this place are not going to be the things that will take you to the next especially in storytelling, the next storytelling level. They can't be. And trying to go back and redo those, it's obvious that's what you're doing and you're trying to change a story. It's like trying to change history, and everyone goes, I
Yep.
see you doing that. Like you're, oh no, it's fine. I'm putting white out in the book. It's like, that's not how that's not how that works. That's not how any of this works. You can't put white out in the book, man. That's not how that plays.
No, exactly. And that's why it's like, I think, and unfortunately, I think that's where we're at with why we like the things that we like right now. And we don't like the things that we don't like. It's not just because people are hacks. Like, it's that sometimes people are past their prime, and that's hard to say. Like, gosh, I am not looking forward to that day, but I'm sure it's going to come soon enough, where I'm going to be sitting at work, Jeff, talking about like, well, Python is still, you see what I mean? It's like, we're going to be there at one point, and someone's going to be like, oh, that guy's still talking
The
about
moment that I ever say in a meeting, when I was younger, it's like, ah, shit. All right, I gotta
right
go.
there, right
you know
there.
What? Close it. We're done. And cut in scene.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, we're not all George Lucas living on a giant palatial estate and thinking, I wonder if I could go back and continue to make movies. So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, listen, everyone, thank you so much for being here. This was a good episode. I'm glad that we went down this rabbit hole because it's such a needed thing. And when you spend some time, like me, starting to now get more into learning about the editing process and what that means and how things are put together in that way, and like how much of the film is made in the editing, it's really interesting to understand that, like you said, art is in the revision. It's in the how we look back on it before it gets put out there, what you do with it, what you cut out, what you add back in, how you make sure that story is going the way you want it to go, or that art ends up telling the story that you wanted it to actually tell. That takes multiple drafts. It takes re-looking at it. Nobody writes a book from start to finish and then goes, here's a couple grammatical changes, Bob's your uncle.
Yep.
It takes revision over and over again to get to the place where you're actually telling the story that you intended to tell. So anyway,
the best example of someone who was the only person unable to do that was watch Amadeus. There's a great scene where Salieri is like, there were no notes. These were first drafts. He was taking dictation from God. That's the greatest example of someone who I always love that scene because it's like he's the only artist that didn't need revision. He's like he's writing full orchestras just as if he was taking notes. So yeah.
Everyone, thank you for being here. CK, Joe, Joanna, Rich, James, everyone who stopped by. This is really awesome. Thanks for being here. And we'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Right on. Hey, thanks, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye all.